For 5 years, they pretended I was expendable overhead, a rusty cog in their machine that no one bothered to notice. But they didn't know I wasn't just remembering everything. I was documenting it. And that day, in the strategy meeting, I opened an email that made the entire executive board freeze like statues. They'd spent half a decade orchestrating my professional limbo, carefully calibrating every performance review, every missed promotion, every strategic reorganization. Now it was my turn to show them what real strategy looked like. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and for 12 years, I poured my soul into Silverpine Solutions. From my cramped cubicle on the 4th floor of our Columbus office, I'd rescued more dying projects than I could count. Client relationships salvaged, budgets realigned, teams motivated through impossible deadlines. I was the person they called when everything was falling apart. Yet somehow, I remained frozen at the same senior project manager level I'd reached 7 years ago. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't strategic enough. Maybe I needed another certification, another degree, another something to prove my worth. But as the years crawled by and younger, less experienced colleagues leapfrogged over me into director roles, a different picture began to emerge. HR seemed to materialize at the worst possible moments, right before promotion cycles, during reorganizations. Whenever my name surfaced for advancement, they'd smile, shuffle papers, and find just enough reasons to keep me exactly where I was. The truth revealed itself on a humid Thursday in August. I'd stayed late finishing a proposal when an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender was Diane Hartley, our SVP of Human Resources. The subject line read, Personnel Optimization Timeline, Confidential. It wasn't meant for me. Some IT glitch had included my address in a forward chain that should have stayed buried in executive inboxes. My hands trembled as I read. There it was, in sterile corporate language. A 5-year strategic plan for human capital efficiency. My name appeared in a spreadsheet tab labeled Tier 2 Assets, Maintain, Extract Value. The notes beside it were clinical. High competency, low flight risk, optimal for complex project remediation. Succession planning unnecessary, role evolution blocked until Q4 2029. I was livestock. Valuable livestock they'd carefully penned in, feeding me just enough hope to keep producing while ensuring I'd never wander toward greener pastures. The email thread revealed years of deliberate manipulation, adjusted job descriptions that disqualified me on technicalities. Performance metrics shifted just enough to keep me shy of promotion thresholds. Even psychological profiles discussing my risk-averse personality and loyalty indicators. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at printed copies of the email chain. 12 years. 40-hour weeks that stretched into 60. Birthdays missed, relationships sacrificed, health ignored. All for a company that saw me as a line item to be optimized. The anger came in waves, each one deeper than the last. But beneath the rage, something else stirred. If they wanted to play chess with people's lives, they'd chosen the wrong pawn. I closed my laptop and pulled out a fresh legal pad. If Silverpine had taught me anything, it was the value of documentation. They had their 5-year plan. Now it was time to create mine. The golden cage they'd built around me was more sophisticated than I initially realized. Over the following weeks, I began to see the intricate mechanisms designed to keep me productive, but permanently grounded. It wasn't just about denying promotions, it was an entire ecosystem of manipulation. Take the quarterly performance reviews. On paper, I consistently scored exceeds expectations in every category. But there was always one crucial metric, different each time, where I'd mysteriously land at meets expectations, just enough to disqualify me from the promotion pool. Leadership presence, strategic thinking, stakeholder management, nebulous criteria that shifted like smoke whenever I tried to grasp them. I remember the Q1 review when Marcus Brennan, my direct manager, sat across from me with that practiced look of disappointment. Lauren, your project execution is flawless, but we need to see more executive visibility from you. The same quarter I'd presented to the board 3 times. The same quarter I'd led a client workshop that saved a $3.2 million contract. But somehow, none of that counted as executive visibility. The job description changes were even more insidious. Every time a director position opened up, positions I was perfectly qualified for, the requirements would mysteriously evolve 2 weeks before posting. Suddenly, they'd need experience with Pacific Rim markets or certification in Agile Lean Six Sigma hybrid methodology, or some other impossibly specific qualification that hadn't existed in the role before. I watched it happen with the Director of Strategic Initiatives role in March. I'd been doing that exact job unofficially for 2 years, covering for Sandra Chen after she went on extended leave. But when the position officially opened, HR added a requirement for minimum 5 years experience managing offshore development teams. Coincidentally, the only internal candidate with that exact experience was Bradley Morrison from the Denver office, Diane Hartley's former colleague from her previous company. They kept me close enough to exploit my expertise, but far enough from any real power. When the Morrison Industries merger nearly collapsed, who did they call at 11 p.m. on a Sunday? Me. When the enterprise software implementation went sideways and threatened to tank Q4 earnings, who spent 3 weeks living in a hotel room in Detroit fixing it? Me. But when it came time to announce the wins, my name would appear in footnotes while others claimed the spotlight. The most ingenious part of their scheme was the compensation strategy. They paid me just enough to make leaving feel risky, enough to cover my mortgage, my student loans, my mother's assisted living facility, but never enough to build real financial independence. Annual raises came in microscopic increments, always justified by budget constraints and market conditions. Even as I watched new hires negotiate starting salaries dangerously close to mine. They'd even weaponized empathy against me. Whenever I showed signs of frustration, HR would materialize with concerns about my work-life balance and stress levels. They'd offer solutions that sound supportive, but were actually designed to sideline me further. Why don't you take a step back from the Peterson account? Focus on your well-being. Translation: let someone else build relationships with our biggest client. The psychological warfare was precise. They assigned me the hardest projects, the ones with impossible deadlines, toxic stakeholders, and budgets held together with prayer. When I succeeded, it was expected. When I struggled, it was documented. They created a narrative where I was excellent at execution but lacking in strategic vision. A story repeated so often that sometimes I almost believed it myself. I discovered they'd even sabotaged my external opportunities. When I'd applied for a VP role at Meridian Tech 2 years ago, somehow my references were unavailable when they called. When a headhunter reached out about a position at Global Forward, my LinkedIn profile mysteriously developed technical issues that made my accomplishments invisible for weeks. But perhaps the cruelest aspect was how they maintained the illusion of opportunity. Every year, there'd be vague promises about succession planning and leadership development programs. They'd dangle potential promotions just close enough to keep me engaged, but never within actual reach. Next quarter, they'd say, after this project, once the reorganization settles. Always tomorrow, never today. The email I'd intercepted revealed this wasn't incompetence or coincidence, it was strategy. They'd identified employees like me, highly skilled, financially dependent, psychologically invested in the company's success. We were too valuable to lose, but too expensive to promote. So they created a system to extract maximum value while minimizing investment. They called us Tier 2 assets, as if we were equipment to be depreciated rather than humans being devastated. As I compiled my evidence, patterns emerged that made my stomach turn. I wasn't alone. There were others trapped in the same carefully constructed purgatory, each believing their situation was unique, each too isolated to see the bigger picture. But I could see it now. And more importantly, I was documenting every single thread of their web. The counteroffensive began in silence. Every evening after work, I'd drive to the Columbus Metropolitan Library instead of heading home. In a quiet corner of the 3rd floor, surrounded by law journals and labor relations texts. I built my arsenal. Ohio Revised Code. Chapter 4112, the Whistleblower Protection Act. Constructive dismissal precedents. I absorbed it all like a student preparing for the bar exam. My documentation system evolved into something bordering on obsessive. Every email, forwarded to a private server with timestamps preserved. Every meeting, followed by detailed notes sent to myself for clarification. I bought a digital recorder the size of a USB drive and learned Ohio was a one-party consent state. The conversations I captured would make anyone's blood run cold. Lauren's getting too comfortable in her role. Diane Hartley's voice, crystal clear through my recorder during a spontaneous coffee run where she didn't notice me at the adjacent table. We need to introduce some disruption, maybe shuffle her reporting structure again. I created spreadsheets tracking every job posting, every promotion decision, every salary adjustment across the department. Patterns emerged like constellations. Employees over 35 with high salaries faced mysterious performance issues. Women returning from maternity leave found their responsibilities diminished. Long-term employees watched their roles gradually hollowed out until resignation seemed like their idea. The network came together slowly. First, there was Robert Kim from accounting, who'd noticed his promotion mysteriously evaporated after he'd mentioned considering external offers. Then, Maria Rodriguez from sales, whose commission structure changed every time she approached six figures. Derek Thompson in IT, who'd been promised the chief technology officer role for 3 consecutive years. We met in places HR would never think to look: the Korean bakery on High Street, the park near the Scioto River, sometimes just walking loops around the garage during lunch. We compared notes, shared documentation, validated each other's experiences. What emerged wasn't just a pattern of discrimination, but a systematic approach to human resource exploitation. Maria introduced me to her cousin, an employment attorney who'd seen similar cases. Document everything, he advised during our off-the-record consultation. But more importantly, find the money trail. Juries understand embezzlement better than hostile work environments. That advice led me down a darker path. Using the access I'd cultivated over 12 years, I began noticing discrepancies. Travel expenses for HR conferences that no one attended. Consulting fees paid to companies that existed only on paper. Training budgets allocated but never spent. All of it seemingly connected to Stream Hire Partners, a talent optimization firm that had recently won several contracts with Silver Pine. The connection crystallized when I cross-referenced LinkedIn profiles. Stream Hire's managing director, Thomas Garrett, had worked with Diane Hartley at 2 previous companies. Each time, the same pattern. Garrett's firm would appear, longtime employees would be pushed out, and cheaper contractors would fill their roles. The kickbacks were cleverly disguised but visible if you knew where to look. I learned to hide my activities behind the very perception they'd created of me. Good old reliable Lauren. Too risk-averse to cause trouble, too grateful to ask questions. I volunteered for extra projects that gave me access to budgetary documents. I offered to help with process improvement initiatives that let me analyze hiring patterns. They thought I was finally showing initiative and taking ownership. In reality, I was performing corporate archaeology, excavating their buried crimes. The psychological toll was immense. Maintaining the facade of the compliant employee while documenting their conspiracy felt like living a double life. Some mornings, I'd sit in the parking lot, gripping my steering wheel, forcing myself to walk through those doors one more time. But each piece of evidence I gathered, each connection I uncovered, fortified my resolve. My breakthrough came through an unlikely source: the janitor, Bill Morrison, who'd worked nights at Silver Pine for 15 years. He'd seen everything, heard everything, and remembered everything. You know, they hold those off-the-book meetings in conference room C after hours, he mentioned one evening as I worked late. The ones where they don't want minutes taken. That's how I learned about the monthly Strategic Human Capital Review, unofficial gatherings where HR and select executives decided employee fates like Roman emperors at the Colosseum. Bill, bless him, had noticed they never properly logged out of the conference room's shared computer. By October, I had everything: financial irregularities dating back 5 years, recorded conversations demonstrating deliberate discrimination, emails outlining the Tier 2 asset strategy, and a network of 17 employees ready to testify. But I needed the perfect moment to deploy this arsenal. Firing off complaints to regulatory bodies would trigger a war of attrition I couldn't afford. Then I received an unexpected gift: an invitation to support the Q4 strategic planning session. They needed someone to compile and present the workforce analytics, someone detail-oriented and reliable, someone who knew where all the bodies were buried but was too risk-averse to dig them up. They had no idea they'd just handed me a loaded weapon and invited me to their own execution. The strategic planning assignment was a poisoned gift wrapped in opportunity. Marcus Brennan delivered it with his usual practiced enthusiasm, sliding the project folder across his desk like he was doing me a favor. "Lauren, the executive team specifically requested you for this. They want someone who really understands our workforce dynamics." I accepted with appropriate gratitude, suppressing the urge to laugh at the irony. They wanted me to analyze workforce efficiency metrics, compile retention strategies, and present recommendations for optimizing human capital investment. In other words, they wanted me to help plan my own obsolescence. The project gave me unprecedented access. Suddenly, I had legitimate reasons to request salary bands, promotion histories, contractor versus employee ratios, even termination patterns. HR couldn't deny me data without raising questions about why they were obstructing an executive-mandated project. Diane Hartley herself had to smile through gritted teeth as she authorized my access to the Human Resources Information System. Working late became my cover story. While others went home, I dove deep into Silverpine's digital entrails. The HRIS data revealed the full scope of their scheme. Over 5 years, they'd systematically replaced $8.3 million in senior employee salaries with $3.1 million in contractor costs. The savings hadn't gone to shareholders or reinvestment. They'd vanished into consulting fees, primarily to StreamHire partners. But the smoking gun came from an unexpected source: the metadata. These executives, so careful about their official communications, had forgotten that shared documents retained revision histories. In preparing the strategic report, I gained access to previous years' planning documents. Hidden in the tracked changes and comments were conversations they thought they'd deleted. DH, should we accelerate Mitchell's exit timeline? She's becoming expensive. TG, no, she's still useful for the Morrison merger. Push out to 2029 as planned. DH, agreed. But increase her project load. Maybe she'll burn out naturally. I screenshot everything, my fingers shaking with rage and vindication. They'd discussed my life, my career, my future like I was a spreadsheet cell to be optimized, but their arrogance had made them sloppy. They'd conducted some of these planning sessions using their company laptops, on the company network, creating records they couldn't deny. The financial fraud was even more brazen than I'd suspected. StreamHire Partners wasn't just receiving consulting fees, they were billing for employees who didn't exist. Ghost contractors appeared on our books, their invoices approved by HR, their fees flowing directly to accounts controlled by Thomas Garrett, cross-referencing with Social Security records. I shouldn't have been able to access, thank you, Robert in accounting. I found at least 40 Phantom employees generating $2.3 million annually. As October progressed, I crafted 2 versions of the strategic workforce presentation. The first was exactly what they expected: colorful charts showing productivity gains, recommendations for further optimization, and glowing praise for HR's innovative approaches. This version sat on the shared drive where they could review my progress and feel secure in their choice of presenter. The second version lived on an encrypted drive I carried on my keychain. This presentation told a different story: one of systematic fraud, deliberate discrimination, and criminal conspiracy. Every slide was a prosecutorial masterpiece, with financial data, email excerpts, and audio transcripts building an undeniable case. I even included helpful calculations of potential legal damages, EEOC fines, and shareholder lawsuits. My preparation went beyond the presentation. I consulted with Maria's cousin again, this time officially retaining him. We filed sealed complaints with the EEOC and the Ohio Attorney General's office, timed to become active the day after the presentation. I opened whistleblower claims with the SEC regarding the financial fraud. Every avenue of retaliation was anticipated and blocked. The network of affected employees grew to 23. We created a phone tree, a signal system for the day of revelation. If things went south, everyone would simultaneously file their complaints, contact media outlets, and engage their attorneys. We called it the nuclear option, hoping we wouldn't need it. 3 days before the presentation, I made my final preparations. Copies of all evidence were stored with my attorney, backed up in cloud storage, and held by trusted contacts. I updated my resume, knowing I'd never work in Columbus corporate circles again. I paid off my credit cards and built up my emergency fund, preparing for a siege. The night before the presentation, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, reviewing my slides one final time. 12 years of my life, reduced to a 40-minute presentation that would either destroy them or destroy me. But as I looked at the evidence, the destroyed careers, the stolen wages, the systematic cruelty, I knew I had no choice. They'd invited me into their strategic planning session, expecting a puppet show. Instead, I was bringing a trial. They wanted workforce analytics. I'd give them analytics they'd never forget. The hunter was about to discover they'd been the prey all along. October 23rd, 2 Aristories. p.m. The executive conference room smelled of leather and coffee, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus. 23 of Silverpine's most senior leaders filled the mahogany table. CEO Richard Vance, CFO Margaret Liu, the entire C-suite, board representatives, and of course, Diane Hartley, who gave me a patronizing smile as I set up my laptop. Lauren's going to share our workforce optimization insights, Marcus announced, clearly proud of his protégé. She's done exceptional work analyzing our human capital strategies. I connected my laptop to the projection system, my hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. The title slide appeared, Strategic Workforce Analysis, a 5-year review. Professional. Innocuous. Exactly what they expected. Thank you for this opportunity, I began, clicking to the first slide. Before we discuss optimization strategies, I'd like to address some interesting patterns I discovered in our data. The room settled in for a routine presentation. Richard Vance was already checking his phone. Margaret Liu reviewed other documents. They'd seen 100 presentations like this, or so they thought. Let's start with employee retention, I continued, advancing to a slide showing turnover rates. We've lost 47% of our senior staff over 5 years. Curious pattern, though. I clicked again, revealing a scatter plot. 83% of departures occurred within 6 months of employees reaching certain salary thresholds. Diane shifted slightly in her chair, still smiling, but her eyes had sharpened. More interesting, I said, maintaining a conversational tone, is what happened to their roles. The next slide showed an organizational chart with red annotations. In every case, these positions were either eliminated or filled by contractors from a single vendor, Stream Hire Partners. Lauren, Diane interrupted smoothly. I'm not sure this granular detail is necessary for... Oh, but it is, I replied, clicking to the next slide. A financial summary appeared, showing Stream Hire's billing history. Because Stream Hire has invoiced us $11.4 million over 5 years. Remarkable for a company that barely existed before partnering with us. The room's attention had crystallized. Phones were down. Side conversations ceased. Now here's where it gets really interesting. I clicked again. The screen filled with an email chain, Diane's name prominent in the headers. While preparing this analysis, I came across some accidentally shared documents. This email from you, Diane, discusses something called the Tier 2 Asset Strategy, Diane's smile finally died. Where did you get that? From the shared drive you authorized me to access, I replied evenly. Let me read a key passage. Employees designated as Tier 2 should be maintained at current levels indefinitely. They provide maximum value at minimum investment. Block all advancement opportunities while maintaining engagement through false promises. The silence was electric. Richard Vance straightened in his chair, his face flushing. What the hell is this? This, I said, clicking to reveal a slide titled Evidence of Systematic Fraud, is why you're about to lose approximately $2.5 million. The room erupted. Diane stood up. This is a blatant violation of confidentiality. Sit down, Diane. The voice belonged to Margaret Liu, whose financial acumen had just processed the implications. Continue, Lauren. I advanced through slides showing phantom employees, falsified invoices, kickback calculations. Each revelation landed like a body blow. Thomas Garrett's connection to Diane was documented across 3 companies, the same pattern repeating: arrive, extract, destroy. You'll notice invoice number 4847, I said, highlighting a particular entry. Billing for senior developer Marcus Chen. Funny thing, no Marcus Chen ever worked here. But that invoice was approved by you, Diane, as were 39 others for employees who only existed on paper. General Counsel Patricia Hawkins was furiously taking notes, her face pale. She understood the legal tsunami approaching. This is preposterous, Diane sputtered. You can't prove. I clicked again. Her voice filled the room, recorded crystal clear. Lauren's getting too comfortable in her role. We need to introduce some disruption. Maybe shuffle her reporting structure again. Then another recording, this time with Thomas Garrett. The Mitchell situation is perfect. She'll never leave, too risk-averse. We can milk her expertise for years while billing for her replacement. There are 17 more recordings, I said calmly. Would you like to hear them all? Richard Vance's voice was dangerously quiet. Patricia, I want security in here. Now, nobody leaves this room. I've already filed whistleblower complaints with the SEC and the Attorney General, I announced. 23 employees have documented similar experiences. Our attorneys sent demand letters to your homes this morning. I clicked to my final slide, a simple calculation showing potential damages. EEOC violations, wage theft, securities fraud. The conservative estimate started at $2.5 million. The maximum exposure approached $10 million. You wanted workforce analytics, I said, closing my laptop. There's your analysis. The room descended into chaos. Diane tried to leave, but was blocked by security. Patricia Hawkins was on 3 phone calls simultaneously. Board members demanded immediate explanations. Through it all, I stood quietly at the front of the room. 12 years of patient documentation finally unleashed. Lauren, Richard Vance finally addressed me directly. What do you want? Nothing from you, I replied. My attorney will handle all further communication. I'm simply here to ensure you understand the full scope of what you've done. Consider this my exit interview. As security escorted Diane Hartley from the room, she turned back to look at me, the predator finally understanding she'd been prey all along. The investigation moved with corporate violence. Within hours of my presentation, Silver Pine's board convened an emergency session. By that evening, a forensic accounting firm had commandeered the 5th floor. FBI agents appeared the next morning, armed with subpoenas and questions about wire fraud. The empire Diane Hartley had built began its spectacular collapse. They placed me on paid administrative leave immediately, standard protocol, Patricia Hawkins explained, her voice strained over the phone. Don't discuss the investigation with anyone. Don't come to the office. Just wait. But waiting wasn't passive anymore. From my apartment, I watched the dominoes fall with grim satisfaction. The first casualty came within 72 hours. Diane Hartley, escorted from the building by security, her personal items in a banker's box. Local news caught the footage, the once untouchable SVP of Human Resources reduced to a perp walk in business attire. Her two lieutenants, Jessica Palmer and Mark Rodriguez, followed within the week. The HR department hemorrhaged as investigators uncovered the full network of complicity. Stream hire partners lasted 8 days. Federal agents raided their offices, seizing servers that contained evidence of fraud across multiple companies. Thomas Garrett's arrest made the Wall Street Journal a cautionary tale of vendor relationships gone corrupt. The phantom employees, the kickbacks, the systematic billing fraud, all unraveled from a single thread I'd pulled. But the true reckoning came from the collective lawsuit. Maria Rodriguez had connected us with Brennan and Associates, a firm specializing in employment class actions. 23 became 47 as more employees came forward. Then 63. Finally, 91 current and former employees joined the suit, each with stories of manipulation, discrimination, and systematic career destruction. The depositions were surgical. I spent 3 days in a conference room, methodically presenting evidence while Diane's high-powered attorneys tried to find cracks in my documentation. There were none. Every email had been preserved. Every recording was legally obtained. Every financial discrepancy was traced and verified. They'd taught me to be detail-oriented. I'd simply turned their training against them. Silver Pine's attempts at damage control were almost pitiful. Richard Vance released a statement about isolated bad actors and regrettable oversights. But when the forensic accountants presented their preliminary findings to the board, $3.7 million in fraudulent billing over 6 years, even corporate spin couldn't minimize the catastrophe. The settlement negotiations began in December. Silver Pine's attorneys arrived prepared for war, but found themselves facing a massacre. Our evidence was overwhelming, our documentation unassailable. The EEOC had launched a full investigation. The SEC was circling. Criminal charges loomed for multiple executives. They're offering $1.8 million. Our lead attorney told us during a strategy session, split among all plaintiffs, plus policy changes and monitoring. No, Maria said firmly. They destroyed our careers. They stole our futures. That's not enough. We held firm. Silver Pine blinked first. The final settlement, $2.5 million in direct compensation to affected employees, scaled by years of service and documented damages. I received $340,000, not fortune, but justice. More importantly, Silver Pine agreed to 3 years of federal monitoring, complete restructuring of HR practices, and public admission of wrongdoing. The criminal proceedings moved more slowly, but inexorably. Diane Hartley was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and violations of federal employment law. Her trial was set for the following year. Thomas Garrett pled guilty to avoid a longer sentence, his testimony implicating a network of HR executives across 6 companies. The Tier 2 asset strategy became a case study in business schools, how not to manage human resources. For Silver Pine, the cost multiplied beyond the settlement. Their stock price dropped 18% as investors fled. 3 major clients terminated contracts, citing ethical concerns. The company that had treated employees as disposable assets discovered they were the disposable ones. Marcus Brennan, my former manager, tried to contact me once during the investigation. His voicemail was stammering, apologetic. Lauren, I had no idea. I should have known. I'm sorry. I deleted it without responding. Complicity through ignorance was still complicity. The aftermath revealed more victims than anyone anticipated. The janitor, Bill Morrison, who'd helped me discover the secret meetings. He'd been passed over for a supervisor position for 8 years, always told he needed more strategic thinking. Robert Kim from accounting discovered his salary was 30% below market rate, punishment for being too good at his job to lose. Even some managers, like Marcus, realized they'd been manipulated into enforcing policies they didn't fully understand. By February, the reckoning was complete. Diane Hartley faced trial and potential prison time. Stream Hire Partners was dissolved, its assets frozen by federal authorities. Silver Pine underwent a complete leadership change, with Richard Vance retiring to pursue other opportunities. The new CEO's first act was a company-wide apology and comprehensive reform of HR practices. The media coverage was extensive. The Tier 2 revolt. One headline read, another. How one employee brought down a corporate conspiracy. They wanted interviews, book deals, speaking engagements. I declined them all. The story wasn't about me. It was about systematic injustice finally facing consequences. On my last day of paid leave, I received an overnight package. Inside was a single sheet of paper, my official termination notice from Silverpine Solutions. Position eliminated due to restructuring. I laughed, framing it next to my settlement check. Even in defeat, they couldn't help themselves. The morning I filed the paperwork for Career Endgame Consulting, LLC, Columbus was experiencing one of those perfect spring days that make you believe in fresh starts. My home office, once a shrine to Silverpine projects, now held boxes of letters from employees across the country. Each one told a story of systematic workplace abuse, of careers derailed by calculated cruelty, of talent wasted by corporate greed. I'd never intended to become an advocate, but when you've lived through hell and kept the receipts, you have an obligation to help others find their way out. Career Endgame wasn't just a business, it was a reckoning. My first client came through Maria Rodriguez. Her friend at a manufacturing firm in Cleveland was experiencing the same playbook. Mysterious performance issues after reaching a salary threshold. Job descriptions that shifted like sand. Promises that evaporated like morning mist. We built her case in 6 weeks. The settlement was modest, but the vindication was priceless. Word spread through whisper networks and LinkedIn messages. Employees trapped in their own Tier 2 hells reached out, desperate for someone who understood. I taught them what I'd learned: document everything, understand your rights, build your network quietly, and strike when you hold all the cards. Most importantly, I taught them they weren't crazy. The gaslighting was real, the conspiracy was real, and it could be beaten. 6 months after launching, Career Endgame had helped facilitate 8 successful lawsuits and countless negotiated exits. We partnered with employment attorneys who understood that justice sometimes required playing dirty. We created templates for documentation, guides for recognizing systematic discrimination, and support groups for those still trapped inside toxic organizations. The speaking engagement that changed everything came from an unexpected source: the Harvard Business Review Conference on Ethical Leadership in Modern Organizations. They wanted me to present the Silverpine case as a cautionary tale. I initially declined, but Maria convinced me that silence only protected future predators. Standing before an audience of HR executives and business leaders, I opened with the same words I'd used in that fateful board meeting. For 5 years, they pretended I was expendable overhead. But this time, I wasn't seeking revenge. I was teaching prevention. The presentation was brutal in its honesty. I showed them the real cost of treating employees as assets to be optimized rather than humans to be valued. Not just the $2.5 million settlement or the criminal charges, but the destroyed careers, the broken trust, the talent that fled to competitors. I explained how their strategic human capital management was actually strategic human capital destruction. The irony, I told them, is that if Silverpine had simply promoted me 5 years ago, they'd have saved millions. Instead, they created their own destroyer. Every company in this room has potential Lauren Mitchells, employees you're systematically undervaluing. The question is, will you recognize them as assets or create them as adversaries? The response was mixed. Some executives approached afterward, genuinely interested in reforming their practices. Others sat stone-faced, probably calculating whether their own schemes were better hidden than Diane Hartley's. But the employees, the assistants, the coordinators, the managers stuck in middle purgatory. They lined up to shake my hand, tears in their eyes, finally feeling seen. Diane Hartley was convicted on 3 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy. She received 41 months in federal prison and $1.2 million in restitution. At her sentencing, she maintained she'd done nothing wrong, that she'd simply been optimizing resources for shareholder value. The judge disagreed. noting that treating human beings as spreadsheet entries was not just unethical, but, in this case, criminal. Today, Career Endgame Consulting operates in 6 cities. We've helped recover over $12 million in stolen wages and damaged careers. We've forced policy changes at dozens of companies. Most importantly, we've given hundreds of employees the tools to fight back against systematic exploitation. I still have the email that started it all, the one accidentally revealing my designation as a Tier 2 asset. It's framed in my office, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's ensuring that no one else has to live through what you did. They wanted me to be expendable overhead, a forgotten cog in their machine. Instead, I became the wrench that destroyed it. And in the wreckage of their carefully constructed exploitation, I built something better. Hope for everyone still trapped in their own corporate cages. Because here's what they never understood. When you treat people as assets to be optimized, you teach them to think strategically. And strategic thinking, applied to injustice, becomes revolution. Sometimes, revenge doesn't need to be loud or violent. Sometimes, it just needs to be thorough. They spent 5 years planning my professional death. I spent 6 months planning their corporate funeral. And unlike their promises, I delivered. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect. If this resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts or experiences. Remember, you're not alone in these battles. Let's build a community where we support each other against workplace injustice. Stay strong, document everything, and never let them dim your light.